They set sail with a swagger and a plan. Cross the Antarctic continent from sea to sea, plant a flag at the South Pole of the unknown, and write a new chapter in exploration. Ernest Shackleton stood at the rail of endurance, coat collar up against the raw sea spray, eyes fixed on a horizon that promised adventure and danger in equal measure. Men laughed, dogs barked, and the ship's timbers creaked like an old man clearing his throat, signs of life and talk that would soon compress into a single, relentless struggle. At first the sea seemed to cooperate. The crew adjusted to the rhythms of polar travel, watched shifts, husky routines, the careful handling of sails and ice anchors. They joked about blizzards and cold that civilized men could not imagine. Shackleton moved among them with steady authority, a leader who listened before he decided, whose calm was a shield when weather or fate disagreed with plans. But in polar work, confidence is only as useful as your ability to adapt. Ice came like a thief. One morning, the smooth expanse ahead turned quilted and broken, a field of ragged white teeth that closed with a soundless, grinding menace. Endurance pushed forward, Hulk shuddering as floes ground and locked around her. At first they hoped to drift free with tides and wind. Then the ship stopped answering the helm. The ice took the bow, then the stern, and the crew watched as their avenue to the world became a coffin of white. Days bled into nights that never felt like either. Light diffused through the ice in pallid waves. The ship, once a proud prow threading the Southern Ocean, became a trapped island, its masts clear of ice one week and choked with frozen spray the next. Men kept routine because routine kept panic at bay. Meals eaten on schedule, logbooks filled, boots mended, sledges prepared. Shackleton never ceased to plan. He studied the ice, calculated possibilities, and, despite the cold biting at his face, never let his gaze offer anything but resolve. When the hull finally gave, a tortured tearing that sounded like a giant ripping cloth, the crew felt a physical shock, as if someone had struck the heart from endurance. Water found weaknesses with quiet, inexorable patience. They cleared cabins, salvaged supplies, and organized what they could carry onto the ice. The ship sank beneath them, a slow sinking that allowed for farewell. Men stood in silence on the floe and watched the masts dip beneath the surface, and with that image came a reality that had no ship, no harbor, and only ice between them and home. Their world shrank to a patchwork of floes and pressure ridges, a landscape that changed by the hour. Temperatures bit through gloves, and winds sliced faces raw. They learned to read the ice the way sailors read charts. The sound of a floe flexing, the way cracks spidered, the color of snow that meant wet danger beneath. Tents were pitched on drifting platforms, pegged with dog sled runners and hope. Food was rationed, then rationed again. Dogs that had been companions and engine of movement faded in number as the harsh arithmetic of survival took hold. Yet despite the diminishing stores and the howling emptiness, the men found small systems of comfort. A shared joke, a chipped mug of hot broth, the camaraderie of people who had seen the same endless white for months. Shackleton's decisions became their compass. He refused to let despair calcify into passivity. He organized sledges, mapped routes, and kept the men occupied with work that mattered. He watched faces for the first signs of collapse and intervened with conversation, duty, or a firm hand. Leadership under such pressure demanded more than commands. It demanded the ability to make impossible choices, to balance the slim chances against the weight of human life. His orders were direct, sometimes blunt, but always measured by one metric: return everyone alive. When walking on the ice no longer offered a path toward safety, Shackleton made a decision that stretched belief: to take 3 small lifeboats and sail for South Georgia, the mountainous speck of land where whaling stations still hummed with civilization. The idea of crossing open Southern Ocean seas in open boats seemed lunatic. Waves in that latitude are not merely big. They're instruments of chaos, chopping and heaving with a hunger for small craft. Yet the alternative was to stay on shifting ice until supplies ran out or the floe broke beneath them. So they prepared, not like an admiralty preparing a fleet, but like Greeks building a single, holy ark. They stripped and reinforced the boats, fastening planks and fitting makeshift sails where needed. They stowed what food and fuel the crews could carry, and then, at the chosen moment, they shoved off from an Antarctic edge and into a world that had never seemed so open and hostile. The first strokes of the oars were the sound of defiance. Men soaked by spray pulled until muscles screamed. Cold found them in the smallest gaps, and night came with stars that seemed indifferent to human suffering. The boats pitched through seas that would have swallowed ordinary vessels. Yet somehow seamanship, raw determination, and Shackleton's unblinking will kept them moving. They reached Elephant Island, a grim, mountainous scrap that offered the first taste of solid ground in months. It was not a haven. It was wind-scored rock with little food and no station in sight. But it was a place to shelter and wait, and Shackleton again had to make a choice. The story of endurance is not a tale of conquest of the polar landscape. It is a study in leadership, in moral calculus under pressure, and in the way humans preserve one another when the world turns indifferent. Shackleton's decisions were never heroic theater designed for posterity. They were pragmatic, often halting choices underpinned by a fierce refusal to abandon his people. He moved among his men not as a distant general, but as a companion who shared in the discomfort and the duty. There are quieter moments people sometimes miss. The laughter that rose over a shared meal, the way a man braided his dog's fur to keep it warm, the private letters read by lamplight that carried thoughts of home like talismans. There were also moments of strained silence when the tension between hope and reality sat so heavy the air felt like a locked door. Those human textures are the warp and weft of the story, the elements that turn survival into a living, breathing chronicle rather than a simple survival statistic. Endurance sank in the ice, but the expedition left a more complicated wreckage and legacy. Navigational notes, scientific observations, and diaries survived. So did a lesson in what a small, determined group can do when anchored by a leader whose values lives above achievement. Explorers who followed would analyze the choices, debate alternatives, and learn from the narrow escapes. For Shackleton himself, the voyage cemented his reputation not solely as an explorer, but as a commander whose measure was the lives he protected. To imagine those months is to imagine extremes. The clatter of gear in tents, the hush when seals were taken at sunrise, the joy when a new blubber cache meant hot broth for the men. It's to picture Shackleton walking the ice under a sky so wide it made courage look both tiny and necessary. It's to sense how every rationed biscuit, every repaired, or every whispered joke between men stitched a fragile safety net that, against odds, held. What stayed with the men after they returned was not simply a tale of luck. It was the knowledge that leadership could be humane and that disasters did not have to become slaughter. It was a lesson in improvisation, how to turn failing boats into lifelines, how to convert despair into daily work, how to fashion discipline without breaking the human spirit. Those lessons would be repeated in classrooms and on lecture stages, in biographies and films, but their deepest echo rests in the men who lived them and the faces of the families who greeted them home. If you feel this story pull at your curiosity, there's more to uncover: detailed diary entries, photographs that show the white world in grainy, ironic contrast to the warmth of the men's faces, and analyses that unpack decisions minute by minute. Read a full-length account, watch a documentary reconstruction, or follow channels that explore polar history to see how the maps and minds of the era shaped the expedition's choices. Subscribe, comment, and like our channel to keep these stories alive and to help bring more episodes of human endurance to your feed.